Hey guys, it's Andrea and I'm going to talk about my process when it comes to making a mixed media portrait. When it comes to combining acrylic paint and oil paint specifically, there is a certain order of operations that I like to follow, and that's because of the different drying times. So when it comes to acrylic paint, acrylic dries very quickly. It dries through evaporation. So as soon as that water is gone, the paint is left completely dry. On the other hand, oil paint dries through exposure to oxygen. Because of that, oil paint dries a lot slower than acrylic paint, unless for some reason you're using something to slow down the drying time of acrylic. Now, because of this different drying time, I always layer acrylic first and then oil on top. I pretty much never do acrylic on top of oil, and that's because if you put acrylic on top of oil, the oil paint beneath it won't dry properly. So when it came to making this painting, I started out with acrylic, and acrylic paint does make up pretty much 90% of this painting. I would say the only part I really used oil paint was for the actual faces. And that's just because I really like the blendability of oil paint, and it's a bit more of a smoother process when it comes to creating a more realistic portrait. Now, this is a portrait of my parents that I made a little over a year ago, and it is not without its complications. The very first part of this was very easy, straightforward. Um, as you can see, I started off with that sort of blue, light blue, almost greenish background, as well as some leaves, and then a golden color for the outside framing. And this was slightly inspired by the Art Nouveau. I really love the framing that they use, especially with portraits. I think it's really beautiful how it incorporates with each other. So, sort of keeping that framing in mind, I took a lot of the plants that I have around my house and used those as reference for the framing of this portrait. Now, for most of this, I just used regular acrylic paint, but for some of the flowers later on, I did use some Posca acrylic markers, just to add little highlights and details that would have been a little bit harder to add, or a little bit more tedious to add with just a regular paintbrush and acrylic. In this painting, besides acrylic and oil paint, I also ended up using some ink just to add some sort of finer details and line work to the foliage, to the plants. I felt like that was just the little cherry on top, and it's just something I've really enjoyed doing, is combining acrylic and ink together. I really like the look of it. Now, unfortunately, this painting was not without its complications. To put this sort of in perspective, this was the second time I had ever used oil paint, and pretty much, I believe, the third time I had ever tried making a sort of realistic portrait with paint. Now, because of this, I've always had a certain trouble with color, and while it's something I'm very much able to fix and accomplish now, it was not something I could do a year ago. So when I had added in the oil paint, unfortunately, my first go around was very yellow, very orange. And then my second go around, I went kind of to the extremes and made it very red, as you saw with that one clip. And it was very frustrating at this point because the rest of it, of this painting, I really enjoyed how it looked. But I could not find it in myself to get the face of my dad right. color the features, it was all sort of chaotic. So there was a period of time where I just did not paint this, but I managed to sort of sneak this painting in as a project for one of my art classes while I was in university. So that gave me a chance to take it to school, take it to on campus, and finish it up. And by this time, I had done a couple more portraits. I've worked with oil paint some more, and I was getting more of a hang of it. So as you can see here, I am now fixing it. I'm covering up all of the really dark red color that I ended up really disliking. And for the most part, the background is essentially done with this painting. It was really just having to fix the faces. And when it came to this, I really just took my time, tried my best to be very patient, and just working smaller areas at a time. For a very long time, I was hesitant to show this painting to anyone because of that very ugly stage it went through. And I even debated sharing the process of this painting, for which there is not a lot of footage, specifically because of all of my frustration that came with making this. But at the same time, I thought it would be important to share because it took me a good while to get where I am when it comes to portraits, making portraits specifically when it comes to painting them realistically. And despite the ugly stage of it all, I am proud of how much I've progressed since then. And overall, I still really love the framing of this piece and how much it sort of reminds me of Art Nouveau while still having my own personality, my own touch to it. And I think it's just nice for other people to see as well. I mean, one of the most common comments I get is that, oh, I could never do something like that. And if you really want to, you can. It took me a long time to get to a point where I'm used to making portraits to a standard, a quality that I really love and feel good with. But like I said, it takes time, it takes practice, and yeah. So this is the finished piece. There was a lot of like line work, acrylic paint, oil paint, and then some Posca markers as well. And here is the photo. Unfortunately, I don't have a nicer photo. But yeah, that's it for this week's video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week.